Hi, welcome back to the Python series for episode 7. We'll do more on functions today. Let's get started. So in the last lesson, we touched on the basic idea of functions. Let's take note of the main points. A function is a block of code which returns a value. Its primary advantage is that it can be used multiple times without retyping the entire code block. Telling the computer to execute a function is called a function call. Pieces of data passed into a function when it's being defined are called parameters, and finally, pieces of data being passed into a function when it's being called are called arguments. Now that we've covered the main points, let's move on. The thing you need to remember from here on out is that the data in a function belongs to it and is inaccessible outside. Let's look at a program example. In this example, I've defined a function called myFunction with the parameters x and y. Then I'm adding the values of x and y and storing them in a variable z. Then outputting the value of x plus the value of y is equal to the value of z. Then outside in the main program, we're calling the function myFunction with the arguments 5 and 4, for example. And then we attempt to output the value of z. When you run this program, you can see that the function call worked just fine. But when we tried to output the value of z again, but in the main program, the error came saying z is not defined. The thing is, we've defined z, but it's not outside the function. So from this we can conclude that a variable that's defined in a function can only be accessed within that specific function. So we concluded from the example that a variable defined in a function specifically belongs to it. This brings us to the topic of variable scopes. Where a variable is accessed from is called a variable scope. There are two kinds of variable scopes, local and global. In the example we looked at, the scope of the variable z was local because it only belonged to the function. If we want to use z in the main program as well, we need to change the scope of z from local to global, which is pretty simple. Let's go back to the code to see how to do it. If we want to use z in the main program, we need to change the scope from local to global. To do that, all we need to do is add the keyword global followed by the variable z. Note that we're writing global z before actually defining it in the function. Now let's run the program and see what it does. So here you can see there's no error. We've managed to output the value of z because we've changed the scope from local to global. Next, we'll move to returning values. Returning a value simply means that after a function performs an action, it produces a result, which means a function can be used as a data value stored in a variable. Let's edit the program we're working on to see how this works. To make the function return a value, let's start by adding the keyword return at the end of our function program. Now we'll choose what we want to return. In this case, let's return the value of z. Now we'll go to our main program and make a variable called result, which will store the final value of my function. Let's use the parameters 3 and 6 for example. Now we'll print the value of result. Let's test the function and see what happens. And here you can see, first we have the function call which we called here. Then we have the value of z output. Next, we see that the function has been called again in the variable result. And then we're printing the final data value in the variable result. So here you can see a function can be used as a data value and stored inside a variable after it returns a value. And that was all for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for episode 8. Goodbye!